Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 83. In today's podcast, we're going through a range of different topics. We're going to be talking a bit more about the Intel and Nvidia partnership that sort of dominated the news cycle for the past week, and specifically its impact on APUs for desktops, why we really don't think APUs are a thing for desktops and won't be anytime soon, and why this partnership may not impact desktop PC gaming as much. As well, we're going to add the ARC B580 and B570 to our GPU rankings because we totally forgot to do that last time, and a few other little news topics. So let's get into it. Steve, another podcast for just random stuff this week. Maybe a few corrections and updates of things that we've forgotten to do in the past, and a few other interesting things. We're recording this podcast super early today, so that's fun as well.
Lots of fun.
So shall we just start with the main/first topic, which is on last week's podcast, we recorded this before the news of the Intel plus Nvidia APU/SoC announcement. So we didn't cover it in last week's podcast. I'm not going to go into heaps of detail this time either because we did cover it in the latest Q&A series on the Hardware Unboxed channel. So if you want to see some of our thoughts on your questions relating to that deal, you can go check out the Q&A part 1, which is on Hardware Unboxed. But we've committed crimes, unfortunately. We have committed the horrific crime of saying that APUs are not a thing on desktops and will likely never be a thing on desktops. Apparently, we have grossly underestimated, according to some commenters on Q&A part 1, the value and importance of APUs for gaming. Obviously, they're important for laptops. However, some people were saying that with things such as AMD's, especially large Strix Halo APU and products like that, that this somehow means that we have just massively underestimated the importance of APUs and that this is actually the direction that gaming is going. It's going more and more towards APUs and further away from desktop discrete cards.
If I understand this correctly, PC gaming is moving more in the direction of becoming console gaming.
I guess so. I guess so.
It's like console gaming, but with a crappy operating system. I'm not. So hang on a minute. I think last time I sort of admitted that I'm not super up to speed with all the APU stuff. It's just never. I think really my point was it's not made sense to date. So if you show me an example that makes sense, then that's when it makes sense. But until then, it hasn't made sense. Like I said, I'm not up to speed. Isn't the 8700G the fastest desktop APU? Or is there something that has come along since then that I've missed?
Yes. So currently that is the fastest APU that you can get on desktop platforms. And I think that's that's where we were coming from. Like that's not a powerful GPU for people to use for gaming. I think where people are sort of projecting this from is very much like a future projection sort of thing.
It always is with APUs though. That's the problem.
I know. So I guess to step back for a second, what are we actually coming from here, right? Well, the Intel plus Nvidia deal is all about making APUs or SoCs in partnership with, Intel is providing the x86 CPU, Nvidia is providing the graphics. Mm-hmm. And so when we were talking in the Q&A, we were sort of coming at it from the perspective of desktop PC gamers, which is largely what we cover on Hardware Unboxed, not so much the laptop side of things. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, the laptop stuff in a moment. But essentially, with this partnership creating APUs and APUs not really being a thing that desktop gamers consider, it shouldn't have that much impact on desktop gaming in general. So that was our sort of position on things. And I think we still have that position. Some people were saying, though, in the comments that we've underestimated this deal because desktop gaming is heading in the way of APUs. So they're becoming more of a thing. And so that means that if there's this Intel and Nvidia partnership, they could potentially have the best APUs for desktop gaming. I think this comes from one specific laptop product, which is called the Ryzen AI Max 395 or something.
Good name.
It's a really terrible name. But essentially, this is a much larger GPU combined with a 16 core, I believe it is, CPU. So they have, the 8700G that we were just talking about. I believe that's only 12 compute units of RDNA 3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This largest APU that AMD makes is 40 compute units. So it's
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit larger.
Mm-hmm.
However, it does require 256-bit LPDDR5X memory, which is not something that you can do on a desktop platform because it requires, more memory channels and stuff like that to achieve. And obviously, this is largely designed for laptop platforms.
Yeah.
So I think people are sort of projecting that product will come to desktops at some point and take over the desktop market. Like that style of product, larger GPU plus CPUs on the one package is going to be the future. But I just don't see that happening.
I don't even know why people want that, because it's very much a suboptimal configuration for multiple different reasons. There's no flexibility, cannot be upgraded. You can't pick and choose components. And there's always sacrifices to be made. So the 8700G, for example, providing they don't make the CPU, well, it's got to fit in the same socket on desktop, right? We have the AM5 socket. That's their constraint. That's the foundation they're building upon for that part. So you have Ryzen 5 7700. It has, larger L3 cache because it's designed to take advantage of that socket, do what it does. Then you want to make an APU with those same constraints. You can't just tack on a 12 CU iGPU and call it a day. You have to remove something from that package to fit that in. And that's one of the reasons why the L3 cache gets halved in capacity. That stuff takes up a fair bit of space. Reducing it from 32 megabytes to 16 is one of the ways in which they can go about fitting a larger GPU onto that package. And then you end up with a significantly slower CPU. So, we know the importance of L3 cache for gaming. Going from 32 down to 16 does reduce CPU limited gaming performance quite substantially. So there's all those sort of things, those sacrifices, let's say, made. And in the case of the 8700G, you could just buy a significantly slower CPU with less cores for a lot less money, and then pair that with an entry-level GPU, and you would spend a similar money overall. Both of those parts could be upgraded individually, and you would end up with significantly better gaming performance. So that's why it's never made sense. And I covered all of this in, as I said, I did an extremely in-depth 8700G review. I don't know how many minutes it was. I looked at CPU limited performance with a high-end discrete GPU. Then I compared budget discrete GPUs on the 8700G with different. There's a whole lot of stuff there. So just go check that out if you want to find out why the 8700G doesn't make sense. Since then, though, the 8700G, I think it was $330 US, if I recall correctly, was the MSRP. It's now dropped down to $260 US. So that's a reasonable reduction in price. And at that point, it could, if it was released at that price, it probably would have made more sense. But one of the comparisons I made was to slower CPUs and cheaper stuff that I wouldn't normally recommend buying, but we're talking about spending as little money as possible. So, the Core i3 12100F, the Core i5 12400F, for example, they become relevant parts. And today you can buy an RTX 3050 comfortably for $200 US.
Mm-hmm.
So for the same price as an 8700G, you can buy a Core i3 12100F and an RTX 3050. And the funny thing about this comparison is I strongly advise against buying either of those components in 2025. Like the Core i3 12100F was a great value part for a while, but yeah, it's become the CPU side, not great. Well, it is a CPU. The core count side of things. RTX 3050, I don't think we ever recommended that product. It was meant to be, it launched at, was it $350 US? It was something absurd like that, wasn't it?
Yep.
$200 US, it's like the cheapest thing you can get next to a 4 gigabyte 6500 XT, which is an absolutely atrocious product. So that makes the RTX 3050 look pretty good. Point is, for $10 more than an 8700G, you can buy a Core i3 1200F and an RTX 3050 combo. Or if you spend a little bit more, like $35, $40 more, you can get the Core i5 12400F. Now, I've got some numbers here for you, Tim. Tell me which one you would prefer. In Alan Wake 2, 1080p with the low preset, The 8700G is good for 25 FPS. The Core i3 12100F plus RTX 3050 does 40 FPS, so it's 60% faster.
That's a really hard decision on that one.
So is that worth an additional $10-ish?
Yeah.
I've got some different ones. Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p high. The 8700G is good for 71 FPS. So I think the other games people will point to saying, well, that's where the APUs are really useful, like those sort of Dota 2, Counter-Strike, those sort of games, maybe even Fortnite on low. So 71 FPS, that's certainly playable. But the Core i3 12100F and RTX 3050 does 158 FPS, so it's 123% faster. Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p medium. The Core i3 RTX 3050 combo, 60% faster. You go from 35 FPS to 56 FPS. Forza Motorsport, 47% faster, 46 FPS to 63. Grand Theft Auto 5, 90-ish% faster, 61 FPS to 115. Horizon Forbidden West, like a new sort of demanding title, medium settings, 15 FPS on the 8700G, 40 FPS on the combo, 167% faster. You'd probably downgrade that one to low. But the point is, the Core i3 12100F and RTX 3050 combo is at least like 50% faster for $10 more. So if you're building a dedicated game PC and it doesn't need to fit, in something smaller than a shoebox, then it makes no sense to buy an APU, and it never has. And this has always been the case. So the 8700G was probably really exciting when we thought that that could be a product that would exist. DDR5 memory helps solve the memory bandwidth problem, this and that. But then you also get faster discrete products at the same time.
Yeah, there's the RTX 5050 now, which is faster than the 3050 in that sort of...
That's another $50, yeah. So you could get or the B580s now at $250.
Yeah, or the B570s exists as well.
Yeah, so if you're willing to spend a little bit more money, there's two ways of going about it. You can either you can make an investment that makes sense, which generally means you have to spend a certain amount of money. And the reason why that investment makes more sense is because you get really good performance now, and you'll get much longer life out of that investment. Whereas if you spend as little as possible, in some ways you're just setting money ablaze because it's crap now and it's going to be unusable in the near future.
There's many different angles to this, right? There's the angle of the APUs that currently exist don't make sense. And you touched on it as well. It's this, everyone always thinks that APUs at some point in the future are going to be a replacement for these low-end gaming combinations, because we're always projecting like, the 8700G uses RDNA 3, right? So maybe in the future we'll be getting RDNA 5 or something, and then it won't have 12 CUs, it'll have 16, and then you sort of project and you go, okay, well, increase in architecture and cores and maybe frequency, it'll be a 50% faster APU, but then you don't remember that the discrete GPUs are probably getting faster as well. Maybe not 50% faster because, it's been pretty slow in the low end, but they will be faster again. And so the comparison is never future APU versus current GPU. It should be future APU versus future GPU, future combinations, whatever is available at that time.
It's just silly. You only evaluate stuff when they're available with what's available at the time. And the 8700G didn't make any sense at all upon release, despite people doing their darndest to argue that it did. And today, with a price cut, it still doesn't really make sense. Another angle I can see people arguing is, well, the 8700G is on AM5, whereas the Core i3 12100F is, sort of dead platform. But then you're arguing more for, features and stuff, and then the investment side of things. And it's a reasonable enough argument to make. The 8700G could be argued as sort of a placeholder CPU. So you get on AM5 without, a discrete GPU. You save up for a discrete GPU and you add one of them in later. Sort of a false economy. It's a situation that's not really going to happen. And you're doing that with an inferior CPU. So again, the argument would be, or the hole in that argument is, just save a little bit more money and buy a Ryzen 5 7500F, which, well, first of all, that's $100 less, that CPU. It's only $160 US, and it has the full fat 32 megabyte L3 cache. It's about 20% faster when CPU bound for gaming, despite the fact that as 6 cores, 12 threads instead of 8 cores, 16 threads. So I would much rather have a 7500F than I would an 8700G for my CPU, because you get the 32 megabytes of L3 cache for one. And if you add in an RTX 3050 on that, you spent 360 instead of 260, but you've got on the AM5 platform. And it is, substantially more money, but you're weighing up, like you've really got to create this niche scenario that doesn't really make sense. But if you look at it from this one narrow point of view, then it, it can be justified. And I just don't think that's a good way of going about things. So the 8700G is kind of for like your extremely small, low form factor type ITX bills that you want to chuck in front of your TV or something, and you want it to be cool and quiet or whatever, and extremely compact. That's where you could justify buying an 8700G. But if it's for a dedicated gaming PC, I'm sorry, you're just not going to convince me that it makes sense, because it just doesn't. Logically, it makes no sense at all.
Yeah, there's some challenges with like an Intel and Nvidia partnership. Like even if, let's say, they make some much more powerful APU or whatever, one of the main limiting factors, as we've talked about, is things like memory bandwidth. And so if you're talking about like these larger designs that would actually be competitive with those sort of, the entry-level gaming systems or whatever, where you might consider it from a performance standpoint, is that going to be this upgradable socketed platform anymore? Or are we talking about you're sort of buying a motherboard and it's got like this CPU, GPU, and memory all soldered onto the board? Because if we're talking about, Strix Halo requires 256-bit memory, whereas desktop platforms, it's like half that. That's a massive difference that the embedded systems like laptops can provide. They can do things like have 256, but I think even Apple with their silicon uses like 512-bit or very large memory buses directly to these APUs. And so are we talking about like Intel plus Nvidia APU combos where they're changing the entire desktop platform so that, there's more memory channels, still upgradable, but just the design is different? Or are we talking about them making more like mini PC things, which is, if it comes to some sort of desktop, it's probably going to be more that mini PC style of product, which again, have never really been all that competitive as a gaming product. Like they're good for other use cases and people have reasons to buy them, but generally going with the tried and true desktop tower PC, it gives you the upgradability, it's more affordable, and it has other advantages in terms of performance. Like you can scale performance a lot higher, which these sorts of APU products, even like an ideal good one, doesn't necessarily provide. And so, yeah, okay, AMD's got a Strix Halo APU that is apparently powerful for laptops and mobile products, and I believe they're even in some mini PCs. But is anyone really talking about that product as like a desktop gaming PC replacement? And the answer is no. Like,
because it doesn't make sense. Like, again, this stuff makes sense definitely for mobile and maybe mini PCs, and then you've got to argue the utility of a mini PC. But that's, again, it's a niche product, so I'm not saying they shouldn't exist. I'm just saying for the vast majority of people, they're not necessarily a useful product.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we can, like, there's products above things like Strix Halo, Apple's M4 Max, which again, like we don't cover Apple products, so not super familiar with these products. But the M4 Max is a large CPU and a large GPU in a sort of APU style SoC design. And Apple offers that across their laptops and desktop portfolios, M4, M3, all those sort of ARM-based SoCs. Now, I've just sort of looked up the performance, like what does the M4 Max chip do? According to Notebook Check, they reckon it's sort of a similar level of performance to the RTX 4070 laptop GPU. So we're not exactly talking about a super powerful, I'm guessing that was in a laptop sort of comparison, but you're talking about sort of mid-range-ish graphics from that large SoC design. It's still beaten by, even in laptops today, is beaten by the discrete CPU plus discrete GPU option in laptops, let alone desktops. And that's for gaming applications. So Apple fans don't come and get upset that, your I don't know, video rendering tasks or whatever on a MacBook are significantly faster than those comparisons. I'm sure that could be the case. But in games, according to the testing from Notebook Check, in titles like Cyberpunk 2077, Baldur's Gate, games where they're available to run on Macs, it's okay. Like it's an okay, like that's a powerful integrated SoC APU type product. To have 4070 laptop, 5060 laptop type performance, pretty decent. It's just that that's not high-end performance that desktop gamers would want. And on top of that, it comes in this fully integrated design. Like Apple does that because they sell them in, like you're not upgrading Macs. You haven't been able to upgrade a Mac for like however many decades now.
If that performance was available on the desktop PC, so say there was an AM5 CPU that offered that performance, you could slot it into your board, get that level of game performance, and it cost $260 US, then we'd all be raving about it and saying, yeah, just get that. Like, there's no combo that comes near that. There's no discrete combination of hardware you can use that gets anywhere near that level of performance. So drop that in, and when it's no longer good, you just have to get either an equivalent APU for the time or go with a different configuration. But if that was on desktop, it would be like $600.
That's right. I think it's not feasible from many angles. There's the price angle. Like the APU is obviously way more expensive. They're physically large. And because you're not splitting the components into multiple things, that often creates, packaging's more expensive and that sort of thing. So there's that. And then, like I was saying, it's a fully integrated design from Apple. They don't offer this as a socketed product, and they've designed it to not be socketed. So they're not thinking about like, you're going to be swapping out your M4 Max for an M5 Max, or you're going to be keeping the memory but just swapping the CPU. They've designed this knowing full well that they control absolutely everything about their ecosystem. So they just want to sell you an entirely new Mac Mini or iMac or whatever they are these days. Is it still the iMac? Yeah, it's still the iMac, right? So they sell you. They want to sell you that stuff, and they just want you to throw it out and buy another one. Whereas desktop gamers, are not going to accept a product like that.
Well, not when there's an alternative. Again, like for the 8700G, for example, to make sense in the current market, rather than the $330 US MSRP it has and the current $260 US $260 US retail price, I would say it needs to be more like $160 US as the retail price for the 8700G.
Yeah.
Because as I just rattled off a heap of numbers to you guys, you can get a Core i3 processor with an RTX 3050 and get at least 50% more performance for the same price. So for someone who's looking at just gaming on the desktop, it's like, well, at what price does it make sense to buy an AM5 motherboard, DDR5 memory, and an 8700G? And I think the 8700G can't cost more than $160 US. Seem reasonable?
I think that's reasonable. And it comes back to things like, let's say there is this mythical $600 desktop, APU that would be available, which would probably be reasonable for like a high performance APU. I think the reason why people would still prefer a desktop GPU, even if it was a little slower potentially, is that if that's the fastest product that you can get for $600 or whatever, now you're having to look at, let's say you want faster performance that only the discrete cards are providing at that time. You're looking at a pretty significant investment on top of that to go above APU levels of performance. This has always been a challenge with these products, is that you're having to buy that GPU as part of the silicon, but as soon as it's not useful, you can't do anything with it. It's just there not being used. And so the larger you make that and the more expensive you make it, unless you can really offer that top tier performance, there's like, let's say, for example, you had a 4070, you want to buy a 5090. You can sell your 5070, or 4070, you take it out of your system, you get some money back, you slot in your 5090, and you still spent the exact same amount on the CPU because that's giving you the same level of performance that you always already paid for. With an APU thing, like if you spent $600 on the 4070 type of APU and you want to buy a 5090, there's no getting rid of that GPU component and selling it, maybe getting some money back. That's always there, and you've already spent that money on it, and then you have to spend again to get the discrete card in. The same things with like, and again, this goes to upgradability, right? If there's the M5 Max or whatever, the next generation product, the CPU might still be capable for gaming, But because it's integrated with the graphics that get faster, you have to throw out the CPU and bring in the whole new APU. So you end up spending money each time you're upgrading on things that may not need to be upgraded.
It's the false economy thing that I was talking about. Like, that's part of it as well. So it's just, but whenever you remove that level of flexibility, that's one of the problems you're going to run into. But again, if it was very affordable, then you could at least argue, well, for those who, want to spend as little as possible, whether you can sort of argue to what degree that makes sense. But if you want to spend as little as possible, then getting an APU makes sense. And I think people still try to make that argument today, even though that's not the case, because you can buy a Core i3 and an RTX 3050 for the same money and get 50% better performance. So it's just like, and you can say, well, the Core i3 is only a quad core and that, but the frame rates are so low that it doesn't really matter. And the 8700G is a fairly heavily compromised CPU anyway. I don't think you're getting better frame time performance with that CPU in a lot of these games at 40 FPS. The stuttering and stuff you see is more when you're pushing up around 100 FPS. That's when the CPU side of things starts to become a problem. But a Core i3 should have no trouble feeding the kind of FPS you're getting with an RTX 3050, which happens to be, like I said, 50 to 100% faster than the APU. So anyway, I mean, I've never... every time we review an APU, it's the same thing. We see the same arguments, and it just never ends up making sense.
Yeah, I think if we do see, and I'm not ruling out that Intel and Nvidia collaborate and make an APU or SoC, and then it's put into a mini PC or something, it's probably going to happen. Like, that makes sense. You want to offer products to people that may use them even for niche use cases. I just think it will be more marketed towards AI and stuff like that. Like, it'll be an expensive mini PC with all of the latest CUDA and AI capabilities and, FP4 and FP8 and all that stuff. That'll be in there, and they'll try and sell that to you for, like pro level money, like the same sort of prices as you would see, the expensive professional laptops or professional graphics cards. That will be the sort of target market for an Intel plus Nvidia desktop SoC platform. There's just no way it's going to be competitive price-wise for gaming. And I'm we're obviously predicting 3 years into the future whenever this partnership will come to fruition. It's just highly unlikely that it will be a sort of product that would matter to gamers. Desktop gamers.
If you want an APU that makes sense for gaming, probably buy like a PlayStation 5.
Yeah, the PlayStation, it's cheap and performs well and plays all your games, not your PC games, obviously, but a lot of modern games are on there. So,
yeah, well, and anyway, I'm not saying that there'll never be an APU that makes sense, or that an APU coming up next generation or the generation after won't make sense. It's just historically they haven't made sense, and history suggests that they won't make sense because, as you say, when there's RDNA 5, there'll be discrete RDNA 5 products that will be a lot better, and they may not cost a lot more. The only way that the APUs, and this is an angle that people have been arguing for a while, and it could be right, is that the entry-level discrete GPU market dies off, kind of like what we're seeing, though it's made a bit of a comeback as of late, where, a discrete GPU worth buying costs $400 US. You could argue worth buying. That's true to this day, because really you should only buy the 16 gigabyte versions of a 9060 XT and 5060 Ti, which are near enough to $400 on the 9060 XT and above $400 for the 5060 Ti. But the performance they offer is so much faster than an 8700G that it's not the same conversation. So when you get down to the 8700G, it's like, well, all of these products we recommend you don't buy make more sense now. So that's the APU conversation in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that'll be the case in the future where they'll just be so powerful and the GPU market will be so different, or potentially there's a future where to get more scaling in games, you have to put the CPU and GPU together and you have to use integrated memory. That's always a possibility. It's just the way things are at the moment. that's not true, and it doesn't seem to be getting more true. It just seems it seems to be staying the same level of true that it has been for a long
exactly.
time.
And we don't, like, people say, but you talk about VRAM in the future and things like that. So you guys are sort of giving buying advice based on future predictions. It's not just off a whim or a feeling or what we want to see happen. It's based on actual real evidence available at the point in time when we're evaluating the product. And if you can see something obvious, like when we were testing GPUs 3 years ago, 4 gigabytes of VRAM was sufficient. And if you had an 8 gigabyte card, you're only seeing maybe up to 4 gigabytes of used memory. And 2 years ago, 6 to 7 became common. And now you're seeing this trend where you've got, whereas last generation you had one example where 8 gigabytes wasn't enough, and now you've got 6. It's a pretty clear indicator of where things are heading. So you can, engage your brain and give some advice based on what you're seeing. But when you've seen generation after generation after generation after generation of APUs not making sense for dedicated gaming, and there's no new technology or thing that you could see that would change that, you can see technologies or partnerships or things that could improve APUs and make them faster, but that doesn't alone mean that it would make sense to buy. Generally, those things mean it will make APUs faster and probably more expensive. So
Yeah, that's right. So obviously the other angle to this, which I think we put in the title and thumbnail of our Q&A, but didn't really talk too much about, is the actual impact that this will have on AMD, because we're essentially saying this won't have too much of an impact on the desktop market, at least as far as we can see it for gamers. Potentially, that have to be at the very least, significant changes to the way things work for that to be the case. So with that in mind, how much does this actually impact AMD? And that's something I'd probably like to elaborate a little bit more on, considering we did brush it off and sort of talk more about things like Intel still having to make GPUs and stuff like that. So we did sort of say in the Q&As that, laptops are dominated by Intel and Nvidia at the moment for the most part. And obviously Apple is a contender with their,
no, they're not.
SoC
Move on.
options as well. Well, at least on the hardware front, they are.
No. You'll have more chance of getting me to recommend 8700Gs for gaming.
Well, that's true. But yeah, so obviously for Windows PCs, Intel and Nvidia are the sort of dominant brand. And people are sort of saying, oh yeah, again, but like, AMD's got Strix Halo and stuff like that. And they're making inroads with their CPUs and things like that, which again is true, but they're largely making inroads, as far as I can tell, in products which is sort of the most similar to their desktop gaming products. So like they have become increasingly popular for high-end gaming laptops, which use discrete graphics, which is probably the sort of category that an APU is not going to provide. So I'm talking about like your 5070, 5080, 5090 sort of laptops, AMD CPUs, because they've got like X3D equivalents for laptops, increasingly popular in that category. But as far as like the more mobile portable stuff, like your HP, Dell, ultra thin sort of laptops, the majority of those are Intel. And yes, AMD is making some headway there, more market share than they had, 5 years ago as they improve their products, but it's still very much Intel. And then if there are, lower end discrete GPU options, that's almost all Nvidia. And I would say probably discrete GPUs for Nvidia in laptops is like 100% market share, or very close to. And so when we're looking at this sort of additional partnership between Intel and Nvidia, it's not going to shake up the status quo all that much. Like there's not all that much more market share for them to gain in that market segment. They already get the vast majority of it. It will probably make their products better. So, Nvidia GPUs probably better than Intel GPUs. So if they partner up, then that will strengthen their products. But it's not like AMD is suddenly going to come out and be instantly crippled by this, because AMD doesn't make that much money from mobile products. They make most of their money in server applications and desktop PC sort of side of things. Mobile is sort of like a tiny little sort of side project almost for AMD. Whereas for Intel, it's one of their main money makers at the moment, because things like servers and desktops are really not there for Intel. They're not making money from those things. So if anything, this is kind of like it's almost strengthening Intel's strength as opposed to strengthening Intel's weakness. So if Nvidia came out and partnered with Intel to make, I don't know, like a desktop, like a really viable desktop PC offering or something, then I think AMD would be in a lot more trouble. But it seems to be largely in that mobile side. Now, on the server side, again, potentially customers will be more interested in partnering Intel x86 data center CPUs with Nvidia GPUs in some way. I'm not sure whether the partnership covers more than just like APU style products for servers, whether it is going to go more into full rack solutions and all that, which obviously is pretty popular for Nvidia. But as far as like laptops and stuff are concerned, it'll probably hurt AMD to some degree, but I don't think it'll change the current status quo that we've got right now all that much. It may curb AMD's increase in market share and that sort of thing, but as I was sort of saying, most laptops on the market are Intel. And even if you look at a product like Strix Halo, it's not available in that many products as far as I can tell. It's this big CPU plus GPU combination, this sort of thing that people are talking about, like this is the future, this is what people want, are these big SoC designs, but then it's available in like a handful of products. It hasn't really dominated the market. And don't get me wrong, for people coming to the comments, there are impressive products that use this. I think there was a handheld that's just been released or demoed, like that tries to use this sort of silicon and is very, very powerful. Sort of more of that, niche. I think it needs like a power pack that you put on it because it uses so much power or something. So anyway, it's quite a funny sort of design, but yeah, AMD has a long way to go there, and they'll just have to execute better. That's really just the crux of the issue, is that they were already pretty much going up against Intel and Nvidia. Now that partnership's going to be strengthened a bit, actually making some products where the two, designs are combined on the same chip. And so AMD just has to compete more strongly with that, and make APUs that people want and are more attractive, I guess. So it'll hurt them in that front. But as I was sort of saying, I think AMD makes most of their money outside of the impact zone, the blast radius, if you will, of this deal. So we'll see about that, I guess. I was also checking back on some feedback from the podcast from the last couple of months, and some people have pointed out that we've made another horrific mistake.
Sounds right.
Which is that when we did our GPU rankings, we only ranked Radeon and GeForce cards, and we completely forgot about Intel Arc GPUs, which are technically current generation products.
Did we forget about them though, or did Intel forget about them?
To be fair, Intel did forget about them to some degree, because I think at the time, right?
I looked up at the time, you couldn't get them.
Yeah.
The B580 was like $400 and something US.
Yes.
So I at the time I saw people complain about the lack of Arc GPUs, and I replied to a couple of people and I'm like, well, there's no availability, and if you can link me to ones that are anywhere near the MSRP, I'll take a look. But they didn't exist. They do today, but they didn't then.
So they do today, and that's why I think we should slot them into our rankings in some way. So
sure,
I will quickly remind everyone of where we settled on the rankings, then we can think about where to put the B580 and B570. So we had the Radeon RX 9060 XT 16 gigabyte in the top, then the 5090, 5070 Ti, 9070 XT, and 5070 as the top 5. Then in sixth place, the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, the 9070, the 5080, 5060, 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, the 5050, and 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte in the bottom position. So with the Arc B580, I think we can put it pretty comfortably ahead of all of the 8 gigabyte GPUs. So from the 5060 in ninth position down, when it is actually available, like how much do we include the pricing into this? Because it hasn't been available for the MSRP, which has pretty much ruined its value. So do we go more on the $250 price or more on what it has actually been available for?
The problem with the B580 and where it gets messy is it very clearly has a CPU overhead issue.
Yes.
So if you're not pairing it with the 9800X 3D and you're pairing it with something slower than a Ryzen 5 7600, But I mean, even with a Ryzen 5 7600, it will eventually become an issue because games become more CPU demanding as time goes by. You're probably going to be keeping this product for 3 years. 3 years down the track, whatever CPU you're trying to use with a B580 is probably going to be struggling more than it would with a Radeon or GeForce equivalent. So that is the CPU overhead thing is just a factor. It hurts the value of the product. I think driver support's been okay. I haven't tracked it, so I think they've been okay with improving performance and whatever and general driver support. So I think that's probably less of a concern. I mean, as it stands here in Australia, it costs roughly 30% more to get a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. So it's like 150 Australian dollars, but that product's also about 30% faster on average. So similar cost per frame to a 16 gigabyte 9060 XT.
Yeah.
Better as like an entry-level product because it is quite a bit cheaper. But price to performance pretty much the same. Though that those figures they're gathered with a 9800 X3D and not an entry-level CPU. So that's going to hurt the value of the Arc GPU further. So I think above the 8 gigabyte cards, that's about as far as it goes.
Yeah, I was thinking similar as well. Obviously, just above the 5060, we've got the 5080 and then the 9070 and the 5060 Ti 16 gig in that order as we go up. And so I think it's clearly below a 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte and even 5070. I think that, those in the mid-range, they sort of, they're just in a stronger position and have been available at the price that they were advertised for much longer, which at least to me is something that I would consider in these sorts of rankings. Yeah,
I think that's definitely relevant. You can't just creep in at the last minute and go, hey, look, we're now at the MSRP winning.
Yeah, exactly.
If it was $250 from the point of release and it could go out of stock due to demand, that's fine. I think that's acceptable. But if it was available in reasonable volumes at the MSRP, then I think it would have probably crept up a bit more. And of course, if it didn't have the CPU overhead issue, then you could probably even creep it up above maybe the 16 gigabyte variants. But as things stand, I think it knocks out the 8 gigabyte cards, and that's as far as it goes. And even then, the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, it's more neck and neck with, I would say, because the 16 PCI Express lanes do help that card a bit. Doesn't solve the problem by any stretch of the imagination, but even here in Australia, you're paying $50 more for the 8 gigabyte 9060 XT. So maybe scrap that thought.
I think the price is the issue on that one, but so I think slotting it between the 5060 and the 5080 probably makes sense. I think I could only maybe justify going above the 5080 depending on my sort of mood at the time, but definitely not above a 9070 or higher.
Yeah, the 5080 is only broken though due to the price, which is obviously
and that, to be fair, that is now down around $1,000 now.
Yeah, the price can be a big deal breaker, but the price aside, it is a very good product.
Yes, that's true. Whereas this is more of an entry-level product that has some things that you have to consider, such as the overhead and things that you've talked about. So, I'm going to slot in the Arc B580 between the 5060 and the 5080. The B570 is sort of like a slightly worse version, right? Like it's just about the same sort of cost per frame, less VRAM, cheaper.
It's $50 Australian cheaper. You lose 2 gigs of VRAM. I guess you could put it just again above the 8 gigabyte cards, but below the B580.
I think that's reasonable. So I think putting it as in RTX 5080 in 8th position, and then B580, B570, then the RTX 5060, and then we go down the stack to the 9060 XT 8 gig and so on. I think that makes probably the most sense because, it is one of the cheapest models that you can get on the market. And would you recommend a B570 over an RTX 5050?
Yes. Well, an RTX 5050 here in Australia, apart from that one that was that Zotac card that's unbelievably cheap.
Yeah.
The 5050 generally costs $50 more. So the 5050 for 50 more
than the B570.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I think that's right. I think we've got it. So there you go. The Arc's locked in. I should, in all my spare time when I get some energy, it'd be good to do sort of two B580 content pieces, one versus a GeForce or Radeon GPU that makes sense, or maybe both of them, in a massive range of new titles released probably this year and last year to see how they stack up.
Yep.
And then a separate content piece that again looks into the CPU overhead issue with maybe a Ryzen 5 5600 and 7600, but then you've also got to add the 9800X3D in there for comparison as well. So there's a lot of testing, and then you kind of need a Radeon or a GeForce GPU or both, and test the overhead in, again, games released this year and last year to see, if we see more Spider-Man examples.
You could do
But
an
that's a lot of
overhead
work
battle.
as well.
Radeon versus
Well,
GeForce versus Arc overhead battle. See
it sounds
which one.
like it sounds like something that we need to do, and it's like, yeah, go do that. But you're talking about weeks of testing, so
Yeah, that's right. Bit of a time commitment there.
I will do it at some point. I just don't want to promise when.
Yeah, it could be months from now when, well, to be fair, nothing much is really happening at the moment. So this is the time to be making videos like that. So
Could be a next month video for sure.
yes. Couple of quick topics before we wrap up the main section of this podcast. One is that since you made your video talking about the 7800X3D being better value than a 9800X3D because it's now available for around $350 or whatever you said in the video, the 9800X3D is now slightly on sale for $430.
That's convenient
So
timing.
10% cheaper than MSRP, which is $480 for that part, right? That's what it has been on sale up until this point. So 10% cheaper. Does that change anything that you've said in the video that you made against the 7800X3D, or would you still largely recommend for people after these sort of, mid to high end CPUs that the 7800X3D for $350 or whatever makes more sense?
I think if I'm doing the math correctly, that makes the 9800X3D about 20%, because the 7800X3D is $360. That's what it's reliably available at.
Yeah, so you're spending
20%
$70 more. Yeah.
And it's on average 8% faster. Maybe at absolute best 20% faster, you'll see a performance uplift when heavily CPU limited. So the 9800X3D certainly starts to make more sense. I think in terms of value, you're still better off with the 7800X3D. But people who are buying 7800X3D / 9800X3Ds are generally doing so because they want the best of the best. And so if it near enough to make sense, they will just do that. So I think we're probably at the tipping point where people would just get the 9800X3D. But if you're very budget conscious, you still want high end performance, but you want to get the best bang for your buck, then in that instance, probably the 7800X3D still makes more sense. But you can't really go too wrong with either option at this point in time because price is getting pretty similar. Generally speaking, the performance is very similar. They're both very fast gaming CPUs.
Yeah, that's right. It's probably one of those scenarios where if you've already got like a capable GPU and you're just going for the CPU upgrade, then that discount makes the 9800X3D make more sense. So again,
Certainly.
like you're saying, high end gamer, high end buyer, probably just go now for the 9800X3D instead of that larger gap that there was previously. I guess the only difference would be if you were more building a PC from scratch. And so you were you had a budget in mind and you had to allocate money to certain things, one area or another. And with there being that $70 difference, depending on the sort of GPU class you're in, you can get a GPU, like a tier above GPU for that money. So instead of buying
like a 5080 to a 5090.
Obviously, that is what I meant, yes. So you can spend the $1,000 more, that you can save the $1,000 downgrading your CPU. No, what I mean more
is...
Save
the $70 to spend $1,000.
That is what NVIDIA would want, right? Like save a little bit on, buy the worst AMD CPU to give them less money, but then give NVIDIA way more money. So definitely do that. I was thinking more like 5060. Not that you would necessarily do an X3D model with these
That's
GPUs.
Right. That's the point I was making.
But yeah, like 5060 Ti to 5070 is about that price difference. So if you were sort of doing both at the same time, then it obviously makes more sense to go the cheaper CPU.
And I think that's why people get upset with the 1080p testing, because I think they think that's what we're suggesting people would do. But
Oh, right. So
you've just fed into that, Tim. You've just screwed up big time.
Right. So are people thinking that we're recommending X-Ready CPUs with like entry-level GPUs? And
Well,
that's
because
why...
they see the 30-40% uplift, but we're using a 5090 at 1080p. I don't, you're starting to trigger me, Tim. It's too early for this. Stop it.
All right, we won't.
Next topic. Next topic.
The final thing I wanted to talk about is a bit of heading down nostalgia lane here, because I saw someone flashed a 9070 BIOS onto, or a 9070 XT BIOS onto a 9070 and was claiming that they were getting about 10 to 20% more performance. So when I first heard of this news, which I think it was just some person on Reddit did it on r/Radeon and improved, like I said, improved their performance by, I think they're saying like 8 to 12% in Cyberpunk, maybe a bit more than that in sort of your 3D Mark and stuff like that. And I thought immediately, I was like, oh, this is like back in the good old days when you could flash like the tier up, like the XT on the non-XT BIOS, and you would actually unlock part of the GPU. Like you would get the additional things that were disabled. And so it's kind of like a free performance trick. I can't remember when, I think maybe it was like 5700 and 5700 XT. On some cards, you could flash the 5700 XT BIOS on the non-XT model, and it would actually unlock additional parts of the GPU. And depending on how good your silicon actually was, like sometimes it just wouldn't work because the silicon was actually defective. Sometimes it was just a cut down card, to sell a different model. And so you could get lucky and get more performance. Turns out though that this is not that, which was a bit disappointing, maybe a bit misleading in some of the news articles that I saw.
I think they laser off sections now rather than just like not accessing them via the software.
Yeah, because then you could just do exactly what people used to do and flash the BIOS and get more performance. But this is purely because of a power limit difference. So essentially by flashing the 9070 XT BIOS onto the 9070, it increases the power limit to the same power limit of the XT model, which I believe is something like 70, 80 watts higher off the top of my memory, but I could probably look that up and see what the actual number is. But it's a high power limit, so the card clocks higher, can run higher, you can overclock it more. And essentially that's what the difference is there. So I think that's pretty much it for this part of the podcast. Let's take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk about our boring lives. Steve, we're back. What has been happening in your life? Do you have any more stories to tell from your little list of things that happened while I was away and we didn't do podcasts?
I might have. I don't have my list in front of me, so I'm forgetting, and it's way too early in the morning for me to remember stories. But no, the weather's been terrible, to be honest, so I haven't been outside doing too much. So I've just been inside working, doing boring work life stuff. I don't think since I last spoke to you, I have anything boring or interesting to tell you other than I did work.
And that is probably the height of boring. Maybe some people think our job is not boring, but yeah, I mean, I haven't really been doing too much either. I guess the main thing that I did recently was I came back from holiday and I was like, wow, my garden, there's way too many weeds in here. Just gone crazy. Obviously didn't mow it or do anything during that period. And as we're heading into spring now, everything is starting to bloom and go crazy. So I think I had like one day that the weather was like semi-reasonable. And I was like, all right, I'm going to start the process of weeding the lawn and the garden and stuff and get that back under control, which has been going well. Of course, it's always satisfying to, spray the garden and then you start to see the effects in like a week or so. So now there's a lot of very sad looking weeds throughout my garden.
They're a bit yellow,
bit droopy, bit sad. So yes, obviously selective herbicide there across all the lawns and stuff, the stuff that you've recommended, which works pretty well. So I think used this. I've tried a few different ones across different seasons to see which kills the most amount of weeds in my area, because it can be area specific, depends what grows in your area. And so this season I decided to go with the tried and true 24D, which is obviously a very popular and widely used selective herbicide. So that's worked pretty well at getting most of the stuff. Still need to do a few touch-ups and stuff. But I'm feeling a bit like I haven't mowed the lawn in a few months, and I'm kind of like itching to get out there on the ride-on again and sort of zoom around and mow the lawns, get that satisfaction of lawn mowing again. So I haven't done it for quite a while. And as you said, like the weather's been bad. So it hasn't been, stuff hasn't been growing heaps in the sun. It's just been growing a little bit, but then it's been wet. So that's obviously not great for using a ride on.
Yeah, it hasn't been warm enough yet for the grass to really get going.
Yes. So I've given it a fighting chance by removing the weeds, killing them. So now the grass can outcompete it and I've got nice sort of grass coverage. But I think it's getting to the point where I have to like start considering reseeding some of the lawn, because there are some parts where it is like probably about 90% weeds and about 10% grass. And I'm just not sure it has the growth power this sort of summer period to get back into actually being grass. So yeah, we'll see about that. We'll see how that's going. But how's your lawn and stuff going? When was the last time that you got out on the mower?
Well, I did, since we last spoke, get out on the mower. So I did mow my whole property. So it's looking pretty good. But I noticed some weeds. I haven't done the spraying thing. That's because it's been too windy. You need a dead still day, good weather to spray that. Otherwise, it just goes everywhere and you've got a disaster on your hands. So I'm waiting for, because I have a 5-acre property, for those who don't know. So I've got quite a bit of lawn and we've gardened the entire 5 acres. And I think there's probably 1 to 1.5 acres of actual lawn now. The rest of it is all gardens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got a bit to do there. But again, today, blowing really hard, heaps of wind, and we've probably got on and off showers all day. And I think it's probably going to be about another week till we actually get some good weather. So got a lot of like weeds to get under control, all that sort of stuff. So that's fun.
Yeah, that's what I've been waiting for with the all-purpose herbicides. With the selective stuff, there's a little bit more leeway with the wind. So I didn't go out in like a super windy day or anything, but it was just like it was mild.
Yeah, the selective stuff though is generally like classified as a broad leaf killer.
Yeah.
So there's in some ways less leeway, because if you're mass spraying that, like I've got like a 4-meter boom thing that does,
right. Yeah.
And so it's dispersing a lot. And if that blows all into the gardens, it won't necessarily kill plants, though it could severely damage them, because that's the kind of stuff that will hurt those plants, especially because I have native garden, which you mostly have as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas, the other stuff is designed to nuke everything, but you don't spray it in nearly the same volume.
Right. So I guess you use a slightly different sort of spraying method. I just go out with the backpack spray and sort of do
If I did
that.
If I started now, it'd be like the Golden Gate Bridge. So
yeah, I mean, 100%. Like you've obviously got to do a lot more lawn.
Yeah, I think mine takes about 600 liters to do the lawn.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a bit. So
yeah, my back and shoulders aren't ready for that.
Yeah, I sort of get out there and I don't put as much in places where I'm like, oh, there's like obviously no point spraying that part.
So you do selective herbicide.
I do a double selective. Yeah, I mean, it's not, like I said, it's not like I went out on a windy day. It just wasn't 100% still. And with the all-purpose herbicide, that's more of a like, yeah, it has to be like dead still. Otherwise, even the backpack spraying spray arm can like deviate off and maybe hit something that you don't want.
It's like pissing in the wind, Tim.
So, yeah, I mean, theoretically, that stuff doesn't attack more wooded trees and stuff. Like, it's not supposed to work on those sorts of
It'll
plants,
just kill the leaves that it touches. So if you were to kill that plant, you'd have to spray every leaf essentially.
Yeah.
And that's not guaranteed to kill it, but it probably would.
Yes, but yeah, there's a bit more stuff that I need to do around the garden. Obviously, the orchard is sort of coming into blooming and flowering season, so I've got to go out and start preparing the ant barriers so that all that sort of stuff to fix up the. Now that rabbits are an issue as well, I've got to sort of double barrier them, rabbit barriers and the ant barriers, so that everything doesn't get affected. And I've started to see a little bit of, I think I talked previously about the aphid problem, starting to see a little bit of that creeping back. So I've got to get on that when it's not raining or whatever. So that's the next couple of weeks that are heading up for my gardening sort of work. But yeah, lots of stuff at this time of year, really.
Yeah, Timony's wall building. I do have one random story I could tell you.
Sure.
So you know how I did Zoe's room? And that's been a great success. I don't think I've shown you that finished yet, have I? You sort of
I've seen the video, so is that showing me?
No, No, it's way better in person. So
All right.
I'll show you next time. I remember you pointed out as you were leaving last time, but we're sort of in a hurry to wrap things up. And anywho, so I did Zoe's room. I have another daughter, Tessa, who's also had a PC built on the Hardware Box channel. It was her birthday a few days ago, and she also wanted a bedroom for her birthday. It was sort of a similar stage to Zoe. She had like her little girl kind of bed, and now she's very tall. She's actually probably a little bit taller than Zoe, despite being 18 months younger. Anyway, wanted a new bedroom, and she is, I wouldn't say the polar opposite to Zoe, but very different interests. So she's not, she does computer gaming. She likes her computer and that, but I think we explained when we built her computer, she's much more into art. Like if you gave her the choice of playing a video game or playing Photoshop, she would play like Photoshop or some sort of arts program. And she loves not just, probably more away from the computer. So she likes all cutting things out, sticking stuff, arts and crafting. That's her jam.
Cool.
So for her room, she wanted, and I got to preface this by saying, with the girls' rooms, my wife and I don't really care as long as it's neat and tidy, as in no clothes all over the floor, that sort of stuff. But they can kind of do whatever they want to decorate the room and whatever. It's their room. Because when I was a kid, like I was barely allowed to blue tack a poster on the wall. We had a really nice house, but I just wasn't allowed to have things in it. It was like a display home, which sucked because I, like you, I used to love building Lego and that, but I couldn't keep my Lego creations out. They had to be like broken up and put away at the end of the day. So it was very sanitized. So with my kids, it's like, it's their room. So she loves the artwork, like I said, and she wanted to do, this was her idea. She wanted to be able to pin all her artwork and things that she does on her walls. So you know the pin board that we use on the roof in the studio here, because I have lower ceilings than I would have liked. So we use that pin board material. Basically, she wanted black pin boards covering half of the walls in the room. So it's like a 4 meter by 4 meter room.
Yep.
So we did that. She's got like a bunk bed similar to Zoe's. And then on the other wall, she's got some other stuff. And it's kind of like crazy art lady room. I've got to show you the pin boards. Like my wife bought her 150 pins and she covered about, I don't know, 12 square inches with those, like the amount of stuff she put on there. So I had to jump on like AliExpress. I bought her about 10,000 pins, all different like themed ones and stuff. So she's been going absolutely nuts with that. It's pretty funny. But for the roof, they had this idea of doing, they were going to like sponge paint like a gradient effect.
Right.
They sort of got halfway into it. They weren't really finished with it. And I know they weren't super happy with how it was going. And I suggested, have you seen those cloud roofs they do for like the gamer rooms and stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
So kind of a bit tacky, but I think with Tess's room, it fits in pretty well. So I thought I could do one of those for you guys. And I showed Tess. She loved it. So I bought a lot of high quality LED light strips that do really cool effects, laid them out, got the polyfill stuff. For a 4x4 room, it takes a lot. Like it was much more expensive to do than I probably initially thought. Anyway, got it done. It actually looks pretty damn amazing. It looks really cool. And the way I've laid out the LED lights, I'll have to show you next time you come over, create some really cool effects. So anyway, she loves it. All her friends when they come over love it. So it worked out really well. So she's got like her pin boards with all her artwork and then her cloud roof. So it's a very, again, unique room like Zoe's. But I'd say like Zoe's, it's done, I think, quite well. I think it looks good. So anyway, that's a new thing I did. I'd never done it before. Pretty easy, just cost a bit more than I was expecting because to get good quality LED light strips, they're like Wi-Fi controllable. They cost a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And then you need, I think I used nearly 20 kilograms of polyfill to do a 4x4 roof.
It's quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, it was a bit. It took me all up from start to finish probably about 3 to 4 hours. So not too bad. But you are working above your head the whole time. So my shoulders were a bit cooked by the end of it. So anyway, that's the thing I did. And yeah, it worked out pretty well. It's pretty cool. I've got some videos and stuff I'll send you.
I guess the final thing to talk about in this podcast is that this weekend is the AFL Grand Final.
Ah, yes.
So Australian rules football for people outside of Australia. The Grand Final, the final of the finals, is this weekend. Neither of our teams made it. In fact, really got close.
My team almost made it.
Well, that... Are you stuck in 2022?
I was going to say out of the bottom 8, and then I was like, I can't even say that, damn it. They ended up throwing game after game after game.
So Melbourne came 14th out of 18 teams, so not ideal there.
Mm-hmm.
And Adelaide, my team, while finishing first on the ladder, didn't win a single final and bombed out and ended up actually finishing 5th. So that is not ideal. Very embarrassing performance from the Adelaide Crows in those finals, but fingers crossed they'll be a bit better next year for the experience and run at it, because they hadn't made finals for about 8 years. Anyway, at the end of the day, with our teams bombing out in horrific fashion, it is the Geelong Cats versus Brisbane Lions on Saturday afternoon for the grand final. So Geelong won it a couple of years ago. Brisbane are the reigning premiers. They won it last year. Who is your tip for the grand final this year? And also, are you even going to bother watching it?
Yeah, I'll probably watch it. I want the Brisbane Lions to win.
Same.
Don't know if they will, though. If I had to put money on, I'd put money on them, but I'm not extremely confident. I don't gamble anyway, so I wouldn't. It's only if I had to, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think I also would prefer the Brisbane Lions to win. I think that would be more cool and interesting. But I think the Cats will ultimately win. They looked the better of the teams throughout the rest of the finals.
Okay, so I think we have similar feelings, but yeah.
All I'm hoping for as a neutral fan of these teams really is just a good close game, not a smashing, because occasionally you get to the finals or the grand final and just one team just demolishes the other team, whereas the previous set of finals, the preliminary finals to get into the grand final, can often be the closer and more exciting games. So I'm just hoping, fingers crossed, that this year we'll have a nice close exciting game that's good until the end, or at least for a large portion of the game. The last time Geelong was in a grand final, they just pulverized the opposition from pretty much like the first quarter, and so it was just it was like game over at quarter time, and so that was very boring and uninteresting. But yeah, a good game will be nice. So fingers crossed on that. And then we get into all the trading and stuff for next year, which will be interesting to follow, because one of Melbourne's star players might, but probably won't, move to Adelaide. So we'll see about that. Anyway, that'll do it for this week's podcast. A nice shorter one because we're tired in the morning and don't want to talk about more stuff. So hopefully you've enjoyed this one right to the end. If you do want to support Hardware Unboxed, the podcast and that sort of thing, obviously we've got Patreon, great place to sign up. You gain access to ad-free versions of this podcast, plus all the other bonus stuff, Discord community to chat about things, monthly live streams, which we just did, so you can watch that if you want to as well, where we talk about, what did we talk about in the live stream? It was like some market share stuff about the 94% Nvidia AMD.
That's right.
Also been an upcoming Q&A, but we talked more in depth about that and a few other things. So that was good. So check that out. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.